The night was quiet, and the weather was chilly as I opened my front door. I just finished my 6-hour shift and was exhausted. All I wanted to do was give myself a highly needed shower and then go and sleep. I got inside and switched on the lights and hung my coat. I sighed and silently made my way to the bathroom. I've been living alone for about 2 years now. It had its perks and downsides. One of the major downsides was the loneliness that accompanied it. Though my parents wanted me to come back home, I knew I needed to be on my own. I was a 25-year-old woman. I wasn't a child anymore. As I stepped out of the shower, I heard a noise from my bedroom and froze. What could that be? I shrugged. Perhaps it was a bird hitting the window glass. I wrapped myself in a towel and went into the room, feeling a bit refreshed. I frowned at the open window. I could have sworn that I locked it before going to work. Did I open it when I got back? I couldn't remember. I changed into my pajamas and was about to get into my bed when I heard a noise from somewhere in the house. I groaned, going to check the source of the noise. It was probably the wind that knocked something over. All the lights in the house were on, so I clearly saw the intruder when I came out of my room. I halted in my tracks, and before I could scream, he placed a finger to his lips. I swallowed my scream of terror and gulped. My eyes went wide and my breaths came in faster. The man in my house was wearing a black shirt with black jeans. He had a nose mask on, so I couldn't tell what he looked like. His eyes were the only features I could see as he stared at me coldly. I shook where I stood, every form of fatigue exiting my body just like that. "It's going to be better for the two of us if you remain quiet. Do you understand?" he asked in a raspy voice. I nodded vigorously, my mind racing. I couldn't call for help as my phone was in the room. I could only comply with his instructions and pray that he wouldn't hurt me. He told me to go sit down, and I obeyed him, keeping him in my line of sight. He was a thief, and he came up to me and asked me where I kept my money. I told him I only had $20 in my purse, and I could give it to him if he wanted. He was displeased about that and shook his head. As he opened his mouth to say something, there was a loud thunk from my room. I swallowed, scared to death. My intruder put a finger to his lips and silently crept to my room. Before he could get there, another man strolled out of my room, halting in his tracks when he saw us. Unlike the first guy, he was wearing a gray shirt and black trousers. He didn't attempt to hide his face, and I took in his features. My first intruder snarled and pounced on him, causing both of them to land on the floor in an undignified heap. I saw their blows landing on each other and winced before returning to my senses. I knew I could call the cops while they were distracted. I stood up slowly and edged towards my room. I got to the entrance of my room, and the black shirt guy looked up from where they were pummeling each other off the floor. I stopped, heart in my throat. He spat the blood in his mouth out and told me to return to my seat. I turned back and walked slowly back to where I was sitting. When I looked back, the gray shirt guy was now the one with the upper hand. I decided that I wouldn't just sit there like a useless person. I looked at the front door. It was locked, but my keys were in the lock. That was good. Without looking back again, I ran towards the door. Unfortunately for me, I tripped and fell down on my face. I yelled out in pain. It really hurt. I tried to stand up immediately, but a hand grabbed me by the ankle and dragged me back. I whimpered, trying to hold onto the floor. My efforts proved futile. Both of them loomed over me, and I started begging. Tears were running down my face as I cried. I guess the threat of me escaping banded them together. They sat me down on the chair. Then they started looting my house. They both came with sacks, and I could only watch in fear as they discussed among themselves which items they wanted. When their sacks got heavy, the black shirt guy suggested that they should leave. But the gray shirt guy had something else in mind. He came over to where I was and caressed my thighs. I leaned away from his touch, repulsed. He grabbed my hair and yanked my head back. I gritted my teeth from the pain. His grip on my hair was strong. "Now you do as I ask you. Is that clear?" I nodded, trying to hold back my tears. "Man, leave her. We gotta go," the black shirt guy said, looking uncomfortable. Gray shirt didn't respond. He just let go of my hair and grabbed the hem of my shirt. I squealed and tried to move back. A punch landed on my stomach and I saw stars. It hurt to breathe. I gasped for breath and tried to see past the pain. I wasn't sure if I had screamed. Blackshirt yelled at him and told him to stop. He said they already got what they wanted and could leave. When the gray shirt didn't respond, the black shirt threw me a sympathetic look and walked to the front door. He unlocked my door and went out. I was all alone with the gray shirt monster. I struggled with him as he still tried to pull up my shirt. He slapped me, and my head whipped to the side. I tasted blood in my mouth. I was fully crying now, from fear and pain. My hands went weak, and I surrendered to him. A slow grin crept on his face, but disappeared just as fast when the sound of sirens filled the air. He looked up, shocked, then stared at my door. Anger filled his face, and I just tried to remain as still as possible. He ran towards the front door, stopped, and then ran to my room, presumably to escape through my window. Just as he got into my room, my door got kicked open and the cops poured in. I pointed in the direction he went and they chased him. An ambulance was called for me, and I spent about 3 days in the hospital before I got discharged. I was told that they received an anonymous call that I was being robbed. I knew it was the black shirt guy. I didn't know whether to be grateful. The monster was caught, and I testified against him. I moved out of that house and found one where I had a roommate. I wouldn't want to go through something like that ever again.
Years ago, back when I had just finished university, I had an incident occur to me that shook me forever. Some say burglaries can be terrifying on their own, and that would be right. But what I saw that evening was far more than an ordinary burglary. It was Thanksgiving. I had just arrived home from a long day's work at the school I was training at, about to enjoy a lovely dinner-for-one meal of roasted potatoes and beef, alongside a couple of vegetables, of course, when I started falling into a deep reflective state of being. As odd as it seems, funnily enough, I hated spending Thanksgiving alone. My parents were in an entirely different state, and all my friends had dispersed all throughout the country, most being unreachable in time for Thanksgiving, whilst also keeping up with my role at a new school in Arizona that I had been working and training in. I stared at the hot glow of the oven, and the steam rising off the skin of the potatoes up into the second level where the beef bubbled, and I watched in awe as the fat dripped off the flesh into the tray below. The hot glow reminded me of sitting with my family every Thanksgiving next to the cozy warmth of the fireplace, watching Christmas movies and crying when the two main characters finally kissed. Yes, we were that family that celebrated Christmas early, but it was what I missed most in life right now. The food was cooked and ready for consumption. I pulled them both out while trying to avoid burning my entire hand as I clutched the fiery hot trays with some thin oven gloves. I then placed the trays down onto the table, sat down, and after saying my thanks, which as my tradition states shall be kept hidden, I reached over the table with my fork, ready to dig in. My neck did a 180 and I jumped out of my chair in surprise as the noise, 2 bangs, had just sounded on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I certainly wouldn't be expecting anyone who was coming to rattle at my door impatiently. I was about to march over and open it when one more bang rang out, with the second bang taking off the entire door, making it hit the floor with a loud slam that shook the entire room. All of a sudden, there came the noise of 2 pairs of heavy footsteps stomping into my apartment. The door was down a corridor, so I had a couple of seconds to lunge under cover, which happened to be the sofa, which had its left side facing the table I was just at. My heart was bludgeoned with panic, and my entire body shut down out of fear as I saw 2 sets of gargantuan-sized boots storm into the room, moving swiftly around, but it was evident that they recognized that the apartment was not empty, as both pairs of feet stopped dead in their tracks as they faced the table that was engulfed in steaming food.
Hey, Tom. I think that Lady Maria's still in here. Go and find her before she rats the two of us out.
The man's voice was low and sounded disgruntled, almost like I was a mere nuisance for being in my own home on Thanksgiving. Nonetheless, I slammed my hand over my mouth and shut in my breath as the guy called Tom started pacing around the room. I could make out that he was ripping up furniture in his pursuit of me. First, he launched a table up from off the floor, then pushed over an entire set of shelves to see if I was behind them. What truly mortified me, however, was the fact they knew my name. They must be some people I had met in the past, desperate enough to steal from an old acquaintance on Thanksgiving, knowing full well she would either be out or home alone. Their depravity made me feel sick to my stomach. What foul and evil men.
Sorry, Joey. That little shit doesn't seem to be anywhere.
I almost gasped at the shock of their aggression, but clutched at my mouth before the sound peaked my lips.
Good. Now get your bag and let's get this over with.
I then watched as two pairs of hands reached around their backs and took off what I assumed were backpacks. For around 10 minutes, I had to lay there in utter silence as the sound of precious objects of my possessions clanged against each other as they hit the inside of the bags, whilst Tom and Joey continued wreaking havoc upon my home. I didn't know what to do at all. Do I try calling for help? Do I try confronting them in the hopes they run away? Maybe I try. My blood drained immediately as I watched in agony as the two men stopped dead in their tracks. I retreated further towards the end of the sofa as they carefully put their bags down and began creeping towards the sofa I was hidden under, giggling in muffled tones as one whispered to the other, "Found her." Tears began welling up in my eyes, and I felt every cell in my body seize up, dreading what was about to happen to me. It was then that the two stopped once again. Their giggles had cut out. They seemed to be looking at something the way they were standing. After just a couple of seconds of the most horrendous silence one could ever experience, they both let out a series of ear-piercing screeches. Ah! Ah! They bolted back out of the collapsed door, leaving the two bags they had used to take my belongings with behind. I could still hear them shrieking as they left the apartment block itself, as I slowly rose up out from under the sofa to have a look at what had spooked them. There was nothing. To me, all I could see was a mirror that stood over in the corner of the room facing myself, and a couple plant pots dotted over by the TV. To this day, I still wonder what could have possibly terrified two fully grown men to the point of fleeing an empty apartment, even though they had all they wanted in their clutches. But sometimes I do ponder the fact that maybe it isn't something that I want to know. Almost 3 years ago, back when I was 16, a mere teenager in the face of the horrors that persist in me, I was forced to bear witness to a type of dislocated reality, with a morbid sense of unease at what truly happened that day. It was something I could never truly understand, and in all honesty, I couldn't imagine that I would ever have wanted to. The damp morning sky rose dimly as the queue of waiting heads poked and roused above one another, trying to get a glimpse of where the line ended. We were all eagerly awaiting the opening of our local supermarket for the Black Friday sales. All of our eyes were set firmly on the clock that towered above the cobbled road we all stood on. The clock had to strike 7, and then the storm of people rushing in would entail. Everyone murmured and whispered. Questions were being raised as to when the store would open. Even some more terrifying ones that at first seemed harmless, but gradually increased in their depravity. I heard this store is making everything free. The manager apparently died and the employees want to sell the store to raise money to pay for their houses. I thought it was odd that the employees would even be allowed to sell the store. Unless they were related, perhaps? You know they were family, right? This isn't some random supermarket chain establishment. It's run entirely by a family. The man standing next to me subtly shivered in response to what we both had overheard. But soon enough, I too was left wondering just how much a backstory this place really had. I heard the manager's kids killed him for the inheritance. People only want money these days. People are even starting to value it over family. This time I stood back in surprise. The rumor sounded just as fake as any old school rumor would be, but the dark undertone that resided in the man's voice that spoke it haunted me. All of a sudden, there came an eruption of sound from the clock face. It was 7 a.m. The glass doors suddenly reared open, and then came the stampede I had been preparing for before the rumors had distracted me. A surge of people went flooding in through the gaping set of doors, seeming to disperse amongst the aisles and rows of the store, not really knowing what they were looking for, yet still trying to find stuff to buy whilst the prices were so low. For myself, however, I had other plans. The previous day I had been examining everything in the store to find the most valuable item and then dash for it once the sale would actually start. After only a few hours of searching the endless rows filled with saturated goods mixed in with the odd can of beans every now and again. But right towards the back of the store, hidden amongst the crowds of groceries, there stood a flat-screen TV. That was what I should have arrived at after pushing my way through the bustling mass of people roaming throughout the store. But upon reaching it, I found only an empty shelf with a sign below where the TV once was, reading, "Sold out." My heart dropped and I began to turn around to leave the floor, feeling drained from the very bottom of my soul. All at once, the lights went off. The once booming store fell dreadfully silent, and every sound that was once there had been snuffed out by the sudden arrival of darkness engulfing the surrounding area. I was only slightly nerved when it first happened. My spine tingled, trying to tell me something was wrong, but I was too concerned with the loss of my flat screen to truly care. So I started walking loudly down the aisles. The further along the aisles I went, the louder the silence seemed to grow. At first it was nothing more than an awkwardness about the lack of sound, but it sparked darker images in my imagination that I couldn't seem to just shake off like any other nightmarish thought. I started hearing a pumping noise. It sounded like some disorderly heartbeat, which wasn't my own. I started speeding up. My adrenal glands started urging my body to sense the distress of danger appearing to lurk around me. I had been walking for a good few minutes now, and the door to leave seemed not an inch closer. I decided that something was following me, regardless of whether that was true. I broke into a full-on sprint for the exit doors. My footsteps landed each with the sound of one earthquake after another. If anyone or anything was in this store, it had my location practically pinned at all times. Fear was engulfing me, and I felt something chasing behind me. What could have just been the echo of my footsteps pacing along the floor felt like a scuttling creature hounding me as I ran. The door still appeared the same distance as before, so I could do nothing more than increase my pace even more. Then came a scream that bellowed all throughout the store. It may have just been inside my head, but my voice broke into a shriek of its own. Mortified of the reality around me, this monstrous-sounding creature must have been almost upon me by the time I could feel my energy fading. I could feel my heart about to give out as I used up the last portion of energy that remained within me to finally, just in time, pierce through the open doors, out onto the street outside. It was dark outside. My mind was thrown into a warped sense of being as I tried to fathom what had happened. Morning to night? Creature? People? Where were all the people? Lights. I couldn't bear the thought of such an mass of questions all at once. It seemed to strike the nerve within me so deep I passed out from pure disbelief in my experience. I woke up in my bed a couple of hours later. I was fully clothed. My legs ached and my throat burned. Whatever had locked me in that store, it wasn't natural. It wasn't human. The morning after I woke up, I looked at the news and found that the Black Friday sale had been a huge success. But my eyes began to water and my skin began to seize as I read how the manager was there upon the opening. And there was no such family running it. Whatever had happened to me that day, it was either all in my mind or a darker presence stood with me in that queue that day. I never returned to that store after that. I couldn't risk being entrapped in a false reality ever again. My mind was mine, nobody else's, and I would ensure it stayed that way from here on out.